The Christmas card arrived on a Tuesday, which felt appropriate somehow. Tuesdays are the kind of day nothing important is supposed to happen. I was standing in my kitchen, still in my work clothes, sorting through the usual pile of bills and takeout menus, when I saw my mother's handwriting on the envelope. Careful, lubing cursive, the kind she only used for things she wanted to seem formal. I stood there for a long moment before I opened it. We're keeping Christmas small this year, just immediate family. We hope you understand. That was it. No call, no text, a card. Like I was a distant cousin being politely uninvited from a neighborhood block party. I set it on the counter and finished making my coffee. I told myself it was fine. I had learned, over the years, to tell myself that a lot. Here's the thing about growing up the way I did. My parents had 2 daughters. My younger sister Meg was the one they understood. She married her college boyfriend at 24 in a church full of white roses and did everything in the order they had imagined for her. She made it look effortless, which I think is the thing they loved most about her. Nothing about me ever looked effortless. I had moved to Seattle at 22 with a business degree, a sublet apartment, and an idea I couldn't stop thinking about. A platform that connected independent physical therapists with patients in rural areas who couldn't afford to travel to clinics. It sounds simple now. At the time, my father called it a hobby. Not meanly, exactly, just the way you talk about a kid who liked to paint watercolors. That's nice, honey. What's your backup plan? My backup plan was to not need one. The first 3 years were the kind that age you. I worked from my kitchen table, applied for every small business grant I could find, got rejected from 2 accelerator programs before a third one said yes. I ate a lot of pasta. I went home for Thanksgiving the year I was 24 and mentioned I had finally hired my first employee, and my father changed the subject to Meg's new kitchen renovation. I remember staring at the gravy boat and deciding, quietly, that I would stop bringing up the company at dinner. By the time I was 28, I had 19 employees and contracts with rural health systems in 4 states. I had also stopped trying to translate what I did into language my parents would find impressive. We had settled into a rhythm of surface-level conversation. How's Seattle? Cold. How's work? Busy. Pass the rolls. The Christmas card changed something, not because it was cruel, it wasn't really, but because it was so practiced. My mother had thought about this. She had written it out in her good handwriting on a card with a cardinal on the front, and she had mailed it, which meant she had found a stamp, which meant she had decided this was worth doing deliberately. The exclusion was intentional. I just wasn't immediate family this year, apparently. I called my cousin Diane that night. She and I had grown up more like sisters than cousins. Her parents, my Uncle Ray and Aunt Patty, had always been the warmer branch of the family. She picked up on the second ring. I got the card, I said. A pause. Oh, me too. She said it turned out my parents were only having Meg and her husband and their 2 kids this year. Immediate family. When Diane pointed out that we were all family, my mother had explained, gently, that the house was simply getting too crowded. This was not true. My parents' house in Columbus was 4 bedrooms and had hosted 20 people for holidays my entire childhood. So it's just us? I asked. Me, Uncle Ray and Aunt Patty, your cousin Tommy and his girlfriend, the Hendersons from next door who apparently also got the card. She stopped. Actually, I've been counting. It's like 11 people. 11 people, uninvited from Christmas, so that my parents could have the holiday they apparently wanted, which was smaller and, I suspected, simpler. Fewer personalities to manage, more room for Meg to be the center of it. I want to be fair here. I don't think my parents are bad people. I think they are people who found one of their children much easier to love out loud, and they never examined that closely enough to change it. That's its own kind of damage. I stayed on the phone with Diane for 2 hours. Somewhere around midnight, she said, "You know what we should just do? Have our own Christmas." I had a 7-bedroom house in a suburb east of Seattle that I had bought 2 years earlier. I had purchased it impulsively after my Series B funding closed, standing in the back garden at dusk, watching the light hit the mountains, thinking, I did this. The house had a kitchen that could have run a small restaurant and a dining room that could seat 20 without anyone feeling cramped. I had hosted exactly 1 dinner party there. I have the space, I said. Then let's actually do it, Diane said. We started making a list. Diane and her parents, Tommy and his girlfriend, the 3 Henderson siblings who'd also gotten what Tommy was already calling the card, my friend Rosalind from grad school who was spending the holidays alone for the first time since her divorce, My colleague James and his husband who had flights canceled and nowhere to go. Rosalind's neighbor, an older woman named Dorothy who had lost her husband in March and was dreading the holiday. By the time we were done, we had 29 people. This is either going to be incredible or a complete disaster, Diane said. Probably both, I said. I spent the next 2 weeks in a kind of focused joy I hadn't expected. I ordered a long farm table that had to be assembled in the dining room because it couldn't fit through the door. I drove 40 minutes to a family farm for a fresh-cut tree that was almost too tall for my living room ceiling. Rosalind, who had worked as a pastry chef before she switched careers, offered to handle desserts and showed up 3 days early to take over my kitchen in the most wonderful way. James and his husband drove down from Bellingham and spent an afternoon hanging lights around every window. I did not post anything about it. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. That's important to understand. This wasn't a performance. It was just what I wanted Christmas to feel like. What I had maybe always wanted it to feel like. Christmas morning arrived with 6 inches of snow that nobody had predicted. People were stranded. 2 of my guests couldn't drive. I sent Diane and Tommy in my car to collect Dorothy, and James made 3 separate grocery runs for supplies people had left at home. By noon, the house was full of people in mismatched socks making coffee and arguing about what music to put on. And Dorothy was sitting in the armchair by the fire with a blanket across her lap, looking like she might cry from happiness. And I stood in my kitchen doorway watching all of it, and felt something settle in my chest. We ate for 3 hours. Rosalind's croissant bread pudding became the most discussed thing that had happened to most of us in months. Tommy gave a toast that started as a joke and turned genuinely moving. Diane cried. Her father Ray cried. I definitely cried. Somewhere around 7 in the evening, my phone lit up with a call from my mother. I almost didn't answer. I was standing by the window with a glass of wine, watching snow come down through the light from the porch, and I thought, I don't have to do this right now. But I answered. I heard you had a party, she said. Her voice had that particular quality it got when she was deciding whether to be hurt or angry and hadn't chosen yet. I asked her how she heard. The Hendersons had posted photos on Facebook. My parents knew the Henderson family. Someone had apparently shown my mother, who had recognized the dining room from a visit 2 years ago. 29 people, she said. 29 people, I confirmed. There was a silence. I could hear Meg's kids in the background at my parents' house. The specific chaos of small children after Christmas dinner. We just wanted something quieter this year, my mother said. I could hear her choosing her words. We didn't think you'd go to all that trouble, I said. I kept my voice even. It wasn't trouble. It was the best Christmas I can remember. Another silence. Then she said, Your father and I have been talking. We feel like we haven't seen much of you. I looked out at the snow. Behind me I could hear laughter. Someone had started a card game. Rosalind was explaining to Dorothy how to play spades. I've been here, I said. I've always been here. She didn't say anything for a moment. The company, she started, and then stopped. Diane told us. She said you've been doing well. I had recently finalized a licensing agreement with a national health network, a deal that had been in negotiation for 8 months and would effectively triple the platform's reach. The number attached to it was significant. I hadn't mentioned it to my parents. I've been doing okay, I said. We'd love to come visit, my mother said, in the new year, if you'd have us. I stood there for a long moment. The snow was coming down steadier now. Inside, someone turned the music up slightly, one of the old Nat King Cole Christmas albums that Diane had insisted on, and I could hear 28 people talking and laughing in my house. I'll think about it, I told her. I meant it too. Not as a punishment, not as a power move. I genuinely didn't know yet. There are things that can be repaired and things that can only be acknowledged. I wasn't sure yet which category this was. What I knew was this. I had built something real. I had built it alone, in a small apartment with bad insulation and a second-hand desk, while people I loved asked me when I was going to get a real job. I had kept going on the days when I was sure I was wrong about everything. I had built a company and a house and, apparently, a family, not the one I was born into, but the one that had shown up in snowstorm conditions and stayed until 11 at night playing spades with a 73-year-old widow. My father called the next morning, earlier than I expected, before 8. He cleared his throat twice before he spoke, which is what he does when he's about to say something that costs him something. I know I haven't always, he started. Then he stopped. Then he tried again. Your mother told me about the dinner. 29 people. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. You always did go big. It was the closest thing to an apology he's ever given me, I think. Maybe the closest he knows how to get. Yeah, I said. I guess I did. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing much. The snow, his knee that had been bothering him, whether Seattle winters were as bad as Columbus winters. When we hung up, I sat in my kitchen with my second cup of coffee, and the house quiet around me, everyone still asleep, the tree still lit in the corner of the living room. I thought about what Diane had said the night before while we were cleaning up, when it was just the two of us at the kitchen counter. You know the thing about tonight? Nobody here needed to be proven right. They just needed to be somewhere warm. That's the part I keep coming back to, the wanting to be warm, and the choice to make that possible anyway, even when the people who were supposed to do it first didn't. I'm still deciding about my parents. Some days I think about calling my mother back and setting a date for their visit, sitting down at the same table, and trying to find some version of us that works. Other days I think about the card with the cardinal on the front, and I think I am also allowed to protect what I've built. What I don't think about much anymore is their approval. That surprised me. I expected their reaching out to feel like something I had been waiting for, some resolution to a long story. Instead, it mostly just felt like Tuesday. The kind of day nothing important is supposed to happen. The important things had already happened, and I had been there for all of them. I keep thinking about the cardinal on that envelope. Such a cheerful little bird for such a deliberate message. What strikes me most, looking back, is how long I spent making myself smaller so the people I loved wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable around me. I stopped talking about the company at dinner. I stopped mentioning the milestones. I learned to redirect, to deflect, to fill silence with questions about other people's lives because it was easier than watching their eyes glaze over when I talked about mine. That kind of shrinking doesn't happen all at once. It accumulates. You make one small adjustment, then another. And eventually, you've rearranged yourself so completely that you're not sure where the accommodation ends and the real you begins. What Diane reminded me that night on the phone, without meaning to, just by saying, let's actually do it, is that I had stopped making decisions from that place inside me that knows what it wants. I had been waiting. For permission, maybe. Or for recognition from the specific people whose recognition I had decided mattered most. Neither was coming. And meanwhile, there was a 7-bedroom house sitting mostly empty in the snow. The thing about doing hard things alone for a long time is that it builds something in you that can't be borrowed or inherited. Every grant rejection I absorbed, every month I made payroll without knowing how the next one would work out, every dinner where I smiled and changed the subject, none of that broke me, and I think some part of me always knew it wouldn't. Not because I was special, because I had made a decision early on to keep going anyway, even when the keeping going looked embarrassing from the outside. That stubbornness, that refusal to stop, I used to think it was just personality. Now I think it's something you practice until it becomes load-bearing. And then there's the question of what you do with that once you've built it. Because the real test isn't building the company or buying the house. The real test is whether you can look at the people who doubted you and respond with a dinner table instead of a door slammed shut. That took something different than stubbornness. It took me sitting with real anger. Because I was angry, I want to be honest about that, and deciding that what I wanted more than to punish anyone was to build something worth being part of. 29 people in my dining room. Dorothy in the armchair. Rosalind's bread pudding. Diane crying during Tommy's toast. That was a choice about who I wanted to be, not just a response to what had been done to me. My father called the next morning and couldn't quite finish his sentences. I think that's as close as he knows how to get. I'm not sure yet what I'll do with that. What I know is I'm not deciding from a place of hunger anymore. That old hunger for their approval that used to run everything quietly in the background. I'm deciding from the same place I decided to start the company. To buy the house. To call Diane back and say yes, let's do it. From the part of me that figured out, slowly and at some cost, what it actually values. The important things had already happened. I had been there for all of them.